The pop of a cork, the sweet tang of something foreign filling the air, and the sound of laughter echoing from a 1970s dining room. If you remember bottles lined proudly on your parents' sideboard, tall, dark, mysterious shapes, or squat little flasks catching the candlelight, you're already halfway there. These weren't just wines, they were memories poured into a glass, a taste of glamour, of Europe, of something that made Britain feel just a little more sophisticated. Some of them sweet, some fizzy, some downright strange, and yet each one told a story of who we were. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may just rediscover the bottle that made your first Christmas, your first party, feel unforgettable. Blue Nun. Even the name carries a kind of kitsch magic, doesn't it? For many households in Britain during the 1970s and 80s, this German Liebfraumilch wasn't just a bottle of wine. It was the bottle of wine. Imported from the vineyards of the Rhine, it promised something continental, something a little more sophisticated than the brown ales or sherries that usually sat in the cupboard. And the bottle itself, unforgettable. That deep cobalt glass, elegant and striking, perched proudly on sideboards and dinner tables across the country. For some, it was Mum's special occasion wine, the one she'd bring out when the neighbors came round, or when Christmas dinner demanded a splash of something a bit fancy. Its taste, sweet, floral, golden on the tongue, easy to drink, perhaps too easy, and for many, the very first wine they ever dared to sip. Maybe you remember stealing a glass at a wedding or being allowed just a drop on New Year's Eve. The fizz of excitement stronger than the drink itself. Yet, Blue Nun wasn't just about flavor. It carried an aura of glamour, a sense that Britain, still shaking off its post-war drabness, was reaching for the good life. And for a brief, sparkling moment, it worked. But fashions change. By the late 80s and into the 90s, critics mocked it as sugary and unsophisticated, and suddenly the once iconic blue bottle was left gathering dust on the shelves. Still, the memory lingers. For many, Blue Nun wasn't just wine. It was aspiration. It was the sound of clinking glasses at the dining table, the glow of a Christmas pudding nearby, the sense that you were tasting the wider world. And if you thought Blue Nun was unforgettable, wait until you see the little squat bottle of pink fizz that turned every dinner party into a continental affair, Black Tower. Even if you never tasted it, you probably remember seeing it, a tall, glossy bottle, dark as midnight, standing like a totem on the dinner table. Imported from Germany, it first appeared in Britain in the late 1960s and quickly became a household name by the 70s. Where Mateus Rosé was playful and pink, Black Tower was sleek, mysterious, and just a little bit glamorous. The wine itself was a sweet Liebfraumilch, pale gold in the glass, light and easy to drink. But let's be honest, half the magic was in the presentation. That black, tapering bottle seemed almost futuristic at the time. It looked expensive, even when it wasn't, and for many families, it was the centerpiece of every celebration. Do you remember how it caught the glow of fairy lights at Christmas or stood tall among paper hats and half-cracked crackers? For some, it was the very definition of continental chic. Your parents might have saved it for dinner parties, where it was poured into slightly chipped wine glasses that only ever came out when company arrived. The taste was gentle, sweet enough for beginners, soft enough for those who didn't really drink, which meant it often became the first sip for teenagers curious about the grown-up world, the taste of adulthood disguised as honeyed grapes. But, like many of its sweet German cousins, Black Tower eventually fell victim to changing fashions. By the 90s, British wine drinkers were turning toward drier, sharper whites. Critics sneered, taste shifted, and the once proud tower toppled from grace. Still, the memory of that sleek bottle remains. For a generation, it wasn't just wine. It was a sign that Britain was finally loosening its collar, daring to celebrate in style. And if Black Tower brought elegance in black, the next vanished classic came in frothy purple fizz, an Italian red that turned every party into a carnival. Lambrusco, Just saying the name feels fizzy, doesn't it? In the 1970s and 80s, this Italian red flooded into Britain, bringing with it a frothy cheerfulness unlike anything else on the shelves. It wasn't the heavy, serious red wine you might imagine. No, Lambrusco was light, sweet, and sparkling. Red wine with a playful twist. Pour it into a glass and it bubbled up like grape soda, deep purple with a lively froth that made it feel more like a party trick than a drink. For many students and young couples, Lambrusco was the first taste of continental sophistication. Affordable, fun, and easy to drink, it became a staple of cheap celebrations. Do you remember that first bottle opened in a cramped flat? The cork popping a little too loudly, everyone laughing as the fizz spilled over? Or maybe it was your parents trying something daring for Friday night dinner, giggling as they poured this odd, sparkling red that tasted nothing like the wine they'd known before. It was never about refinement. It was about joy. Lambrusco matched with pizza, crisps, or even takeaway curry. It didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling. A burst of Italy brought into ordinary British homes. A glass filled with novelty and laughter. But, as with many of these wines, its very charm became its downfall. By the late 80s, Lambrusco had developed a reputation for being cheap, unserious. Wine critics dismissed it as pop in a bottle. Supermarkets moved on, stocking drier, more prestigious wines, and the fizzy purple fizz slipped quietly into obscurity. Yet, for those who remember, Lambrusco wasn't just a drink. It was youth. It was freedom. It was the thrill of something foreign and fun. And if Lambrusco was all about light-hearted fizz, the next vanished favorite added a syrupy sweetness, one that often found its way into Christmas glasses and even snuck into Babycham. Blue bowls. Cherry brandy wasn't quite a wine in the traditional sense. It was a fortified, wine-based liqueur. But for Britain in the 60s, 70s, and even well into the 80s, it was everywhere. Imported from Holland by the centuries-old Bowls Company, its syrupy sweetness made it a fixture of sideboards, cocktail cabinets, and Christmas parties. The bottle itself was elegant and inviting, with its rich, ruby glow hinting at the flavor within. One sip, and you'd be met with a rush of sticky cherry warmth, sweet, strong, and strangely comforting. For some, it was enjoyed straight, in small glasses that made you feel just a little decadent. For others, it was mixed, often finding its way into a glass of Babycham, giving that already sweet fizz a sugary cherry kick. If you grew up in a British household of the time, you'll remember who drank it. The aunties at weddings, perched at round tables with handbags tucked behind their chairs, gossiping while sipping cherry brandy, or perhaps your gran pouring a tiny glass just to warm the bones on Christmas Eve. And for many kids of the era, it was the forbidden fruit, a drink you'd sneak a finger dip from when no one was looking, shocked at how strong and sweet it was all at once. But fashions are cruel, and by the late 80s and 90s, drinks like cherry brandy were dismissed as dated relics of a bygone age. Sweeter, syrupy liqueur wines gave way to cleaner, sharper spirits and more fashionable imports. Slowly, Blue Bowls cherry brandy vanished from prominence, taking with it a very particular flavor of Britain's social life. Still, the memory lingers. It wasn't just a drink. It was weddings, Christmases, and the sense of being just a little bit naughty. And if cherry brandy carried the warmth of celebrations, the next vanished classic was humbler, earthier, bubbling away in demijohns across countless British kitchens. Before supermarkets overflowed with bottles from France, Italy, and Chile, many British households relied on something closer to home: country wines, blackcurrant, elderberry, damson, even dandelion. These fruity brews were as much a part of post-war Britain as ration books and home baking. They weren't the sophisticated imports you'd find at a dinner party, but they carried a different kind of charm: resourceful, thrifty, and deeply local. Picture the scene: a row of demijohns bubbling quietly in the airing cupboard, rubber stoppers hissing, and that unmistakable sweet-tart smell of fermentation filling the house. Maybe your dad fancied himself a winemaker, or your mum accepted a bottle from a neighbor who insisted, "This one's turned out better than last year." The flavors were bold, often sharp, sometimes downright questionable, but they were yours. Blackcurrant wine in particular stood out. Deep purple in the glass, it clung to the sides like ink. One sip carried that tart edge of hedgerows, the taste of summer boiled down into something warming for winter evenings. For many, it was their very first sip of alcohol, half a glass at Christmas, diluted and served with a wink. And it wasn't just about drinking. These wines symbolized a do-it-yourself Britain, a country still cautious with money, still proud of making something from scratch. They weren't glamorous, but they were social, shared at fêtes, raffled off at local clubs, or poured at kitchen tables where friends lingered long into the night. By the 1980s, though, homemade and shop-bought country wines faded, pushed aside by the flood of affordable imports. Why brew in the cupboard when you could pick up a bottle of Chardonnay at Tesco? Yet, those who remember can still smell it, the sharp tang, the sugary sweetness, the faint fizz of bottles stored just a little too long. And if country wines captured Britain's thrifty heart, the next vanished favorite offered pure sparkle, a sweet Italian fizz once billed as the affordable champagne. Asti Spumante, just the name once sounded like luxury. Imported from northern Italy, it became one of the most recognizable bottles on British shelves in the 1970s and 80s, a sparkling wine that promised all the glamour of champagne, but at a price the average family could afford. Uncork a bottle, and you'd be met with a joyful pop, a fizz of pale golden bubbles rushing to the surface. The taste was sweet, light, and cheerful, low in alcohol, which made it less intimidating, more approachable. For many, Asti was the celebration wine. Weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, New Year's Eve, it seemed there was always a frosted bottle of Asti Spumante chilling in the fridge, ready for that moment when voices sang out and glasses clinked together. Do you remember that first sip? Maybe it was handed to you at a wedding reception, the glass slippery with condensation, the fizz tickling your nose before you even took a drink. It wasn't sharp or dry like champagne. It was gentle, fruity, almost floral, more like a sweet memory than a serious wine. The branding added to the sense of occasion. Martini plastered its name proudly on the bottle, its adverts promising style, sophistication, a taste of la dolce vita, and for a while it worked. Asti Spumante became the people's sparkle, a gateway to a more glamorous world. But fashions shifted. By the 1990s, champagne had cemented itself as the only proper celebration drink, and Asti was quietly sneered at. Too sweet, too cheap, too old-fashioned. Slowly, it slipped from center stage, replaced by Prosecco and other sparklers that promised the same fun, but with more modern prestige. Yet for those who remember, Asti wasn't just a drink. It was laughter in a village hall, the countdown to midnight, the clinking of coupes as confetti still lingered on the floor. And if Asti was the bubbly that made Britain feel sophisticated, the next vanished favorite was something even quirkier, a sparkling perry in a tiny glass with a little deer that became an icon of its own. Baby Cham. Just hearing the name is enough to conjure up a very particular kind of memory. Launched in the 1950s, this champagne perry was the very first sparkling drink marketed directly to women, and in Britain it became nothing short of a cultural icon. For decades, no Christmas, wedding, or night out at the local seemed complete without those tiny bottles lined up behind the bar. The look was unmistakable, a pale golden fizz poured not into a wine glass, but into a coupe, the kind of glamorous shallow glass you'd expect in a Hollywood movie, and on the label, that little deer prancing proudly, promising something light, sweet, and a little bit cheeky. Do you remember your first sip? Maybe you weren't supposed to, but someone handed you a coupe at a family party. The bubbles danced up your nose, the taste was sugary and playful, more like fizzy pop than serious wine. It made you feel grown up but safe too. Baby Cham wasn't about sophistication, it was about fun, about sparkle, about joining in. For women especially, Baby Cham carried a sense of liberation. At a time when pub culture was dominated by pints and whiskies, here was a drink designed to be glamorous, approachable, and distinctly feminine. The adverts leaned into it, cheeky, stylish, always with that slogan, "I'd love a Baby Cham," and Britain listened. Through the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, Baby Cham was everywhere, from smoky dance halls to family living rooms decked out with tinsel. But by the 1990s, tastes had changed. Sweeter drinks fell out of favor, alcopops and cocktails took their place, and Baby Cham faded into memory. The deer still exists on niche bottles today, but for most, it belongs firmly to the past. Yet, the memory lingers. Baby Cham wasn't just a drink. It was sparkle in a coupe glass, a cheeky wink at tradition, and the joy of celebrating life's little moments. And if Baby Cham was playful and light, the next vanished wine was its opposite, dusty, syrupy, and forever sitting half-finished in the cupboard. Liebfraumilch. Even if you never drank it, you'll remember the name. It seemed to be everywhere in Britain during the 70s and 80s. Cheap, sweet German white wine, imported in vast quantities and stacked high in supermarkets and off-licenses. Where Blue Nun was its glamorous sibling, Liebfraumilch was the everyday version, less polished, less respected, but just as much a part of British cupboards up and down the country. Pour it into a glass, and you'd get a pale, syrupy liquid, golden but faint, with a sweetness that clung to the tongue. It was simple, approachable, and for many families, it became the house wine, not for impressing the neighbors, but for quiet evenings, card games, or Sunday roasts when something continental was needed. Do you remember those dusty bottles? Sometimes half-finished, shoved at the back of a sideboard, waiting to be brought out when no one wanted to waste the good stuff. Maybe your parents bought it in bulk, or your gran kept a bottle for years, convinced she'd need it one day. It wasn't always about taste. It was about having wine at all, at a time when wine drinking was still new to Britain's working and middle classes. But like many of its cousins, Liebfraumilch's reputation took a sharp fall. By the 90s, critics mocked it as bland, sugary, unsophisticated. As British palates shifted toward drier whites and more fashionable imports, the humble Liebfraumilch was quietly abandoned, left to linger only in memory. Still, for those who remember, it's hard not to feel a pang of nostalgia. Liebfraumilch wasn't just cheap plonk, it was the taste of a Briton learning how to drink wine, fumbling its way into a new kind of culture. And if Liebfraumilch was the quiet background bottle, the next vanished wine was its flashier cousin, splashed across TV adverts, poured over ice, and sold with a jingle that still echoes today. If you watched TV in the early 1980s, you'll remember the jingle, "Riunite on ice." That's nice. For a brief, fizzy moment, this Italian import was everywhere in Britain. Riunite Lambrusco wasn't just a wine. It was a marketing phenomenon, plastered across adverts that promised a slice of continental glamour poured straight into your glass. Unlike traditional reds, Riunite Lambrusco was sweet, frothy, and best served cold, over ice no less, which felt daring at the time. Pour it out, and you'd get a lively purple fizz, cheerful and light, with a taste that straddled the line between wine and soda. It was fun, uncomplicated, and made you feel like you were part of something modern, fashionable, even a little Americanized. Do you remember those adverts? Glamorous couples on yachts, stylish parties, all set to that unforgettable jingle. It was a far cry from the kitchen tables and paper plates where most bottles were actually opened. In reality, Riunite was poured at student gatherings, family parties, and budget-friendly dinners. It was the wine of accessibility, sweet enough for beginners, cheap enough for everyone, and trendy enough to feel like a treat. But just as quickly as it rose, Riunite fell. By the late 80s, British tastes were shifting again. The sweetness that once seemed appealing now felt unsophisticated. The advertising camp rather than chic. Supermarkets stopped stacking it high, and the name slipped from memory, becoming one of those, "Oh yes, do you remember that?" drinks of the era. Still, Riunite left its mark. For many, it was the soundtrack of their youth, the clink of glasses over ice, the taste of carefree fun, the jingle that played long after the bottle was empty. And with Riunite's fall, so too ended an era of sweet, fizzy imports that defined a generation. If any of these wines stirred a memory for you, your parents' sideboard, your first Christmas toast, your nan's kitchen, share it in the comments. These stories keep the past alive, and if you'd like to take more trips down Britain's memory lane, join us here. Hit subscribe, not for the drinks, but for the memories we'll never let fade, because you didn't just drink these wines, you lived them.